Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. I am here today to do a book haul revisit. If you are unfamiliar, this is where I look at book hauls from the 2 previous years that I was on BookTube and look at the books that I hauled and brought into my library and check in to see how many of them I have read. This is a way of keeping myself accountable so I can keep thinking about whether or not I have read the books that I have on my shelf, but also it helps me be a little bit more intentional in thinking about the books that I bring into my library so I don't end up taking up a lot of space with things that I am probably not going to get around to reading. So in August of 2019, I brought 16 books into my library. In August of 2020, I brought 9 into my library. So we have a lot of books to get through. I am not going to talk about the plot of these books very much, if at all. If you would like to know a little bit more about what each of these books is about or anything like that, I will put links to the original book hauls in the description box down below, so you can feel free to check those out. Now, we're going to start with the oldest book haul, which is the August 2019 one, which is again when I brought 16 books, a whopping 16 books into my library. So let's take a look at them and see how I've done. Spoiler alert, it's not very good. The first one that I brought into my library in August of 2019 was Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. This, at the time, I believe, was just longlisted for the Booker Prize when I ordered it. I'm not even sure it had made the shortlist at this point, but it ultimately went on to co-win the Booker Prize for that year. It tied with Margaret Atwood's The Testaments. I did read this book last year. I did it as a buddy read with Lindsay from Lindsay's Book Life, and I really loved this book a lot. I have not read The Testaments by Margaret Atwood, but I feel in my heart that this probably should have been the only winner of the Booker Prize that year, and I think that's a sentiment that a lot of people share. It's a fantastic book. I enjoyed it. I'm not going to talk about it too much because, again, I will have the original haul video down below where you can find out more details about this. You're probably already familiar with it because, like I said, it did go on to co-win the Booker Prize, but at the time I hauled it, I believe it had just been longlisted, and I was really excited to read it, and I'm glad that I did get around to doing that. Then we have a couple of books that are what I would call library builders, things that I don't necessarily intend to prioritize and get to quickly, but would like to have around so I can get to them at some point. And the first 3 are actually from Arsenal Pulp Press. They did a series called Little Sisters Classics, where they tried to find LGBTQ classics that were in danger of being either forgotten or out of print, and they brought them back into print. And the first one I got was The Song of the Loon, which has a wild cover. I believe that is the original cover, and then they inlay it with this. What I really like about these is, first, the mission statement to bring back forgotten or out of print LGBTQ classics, but they all come with extras, almost like bonus material on a DVD, back when DVDs had bonus material, which is really interesting. And this one was a bit of a reach, but it sounded really interesting, and it was referenced in the Stonewall Reader, I believe, because in one of those, someone who ran a gay bookstore in New York City around the time of Stonewall mentioned that this was the best-selling book at the time. So there was a bit of interest around that. I think that's actually how I discovered the Little Sisters Classics, and I ordered it as a point of interest. So I'm not surprised that 2 years later I have not gotten around to reading it. But I also really just wanted to support that project and initiative from Arsenal Pulp Press. It is, I think, admirable. And I have 2 more to show you from that series that I hauled in this month. This is the one that I would probably prioritize first, but I have not gotten around to reading it yet. It's Blackbird by Larry Duplechan. The reason that this one seems a little bit more interesting to me in terms of prioritizing it is that it is by a Black author about the Black queer experience. I believe it was published in the 80s, first published in 1986. So I think that's a perspective that has been crowded out traditionally in the LGBTQ community. So I would be interested in getting to this one at some point. But again, all 3 of these Arsenal Pulp Press books are things that I would like to get to someday, but am not necessarily in any kind of a rush to get to. The final one is Patience and Sarah by Isabel Miller. This one is a lesbian book, you can probably tell. And again, I have not read it. Someday I will get around to it, but I'm not in any kind of rush. The other library builder that I got is not part of the Arsenal Pulp Press Little Sisters Classics. It's Becoming a Man by Paul Monette. This is an author I have not read and I constantly hear really good things about and really want to get to at some point. I just haven't gotten around to it. So I figured if I have this in my library, the likelihood that I will get around to it increases. And it is perpetually on my pile of possibilities for June when I focus on Pride reading. And I just haven't gotten around to it. But I will get around to this or a different Paul Monette book at some point. The other reason I ended up hauling it, I believe, is that I was in an independent bookstore in Missoula and saw it on the shelf. And I always have it in my mind that I want to support bookstores that have books that are of interest and varied books, things like that. So support the bookstore for having it, support the publisher for having it out in the world in the first place. So that is why I got it. And again, I was not in any kind of rush. It's just something I wanted to have in my library. So you can kind of exempt some of these books in this really large book haul from the idea that I try to be a little bit more intentional, even though I have not gotten to them 2 years later and may very well not get to them in the next 2 years. When I get to them, I will get to them and it will be fine. The next one is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I don't remember what prompted me to purchase. This is actually not the edition that I had purchased and originally hauled, but it is the version I ended up with. I ended up doing a buddy read for this with Britta Bowler. I think I may have purchased it because I knew that Greta Gerwig's film adaptation was coming, and that was a good excuse to finally get around to reading it. I don't think Britta and I had planned a buddy read at this point. I just knew I wanted to read it, and it worked out that we did it together. The reason this is not the one that I originally hauled is that it turns out the version that I had purchased from my local used bookstore was actually only half of the book. There are 2 parts to this, and I had not realized that. There's part 1 and part 2, and part 2 is the more adult part of the book where the girls are all older, and I only had half of the book, basically. So it was interesting, as Britta and I were planning the buddy read, we were both kind of thinking, that's weird, the pages really don't align. And that was why. My book ended with part 1, so I had to go out and get a copy that had part 1 and part 2. So I have read this one. And it's a really pretty edition of it. Actually, I almost prefer it without the dust jacket because it has this really pretty textured, I don't know if you can see with the lighting, cover. It has gilt pages. It's just a really adorable edition of the book, and I did get around to reading it. Then there are a couple of books that I saw in my local used bookstore in the sale section. So they were basically $1 each. Some of them I regret, some of them I think are fine. The first one is Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. I don't really regret this one. Now, I have read Olive Kitteridge, but I feel like I need to reread it at some point. And because I'm doing my Pulitzer Prize project, when I saw it, I thought, okay, I'll reread it as part of that. Because I remember not liking it all that much, but I hear so many good things about it that I feel like maybe I should revisit. Maybe I'm a little bit older now, and that will change my feeling about the book. So because it was $1, I figured I would grab it. And I don't regret this one because for $1, it's just going to sit on my shelf. And when I get to it as part of my Pulitzer Prize project, I'll get to it. I think it will go pretty quickly when I get to it. It's a series of interlocked stories that all deal with the title character in some way. So it'll be interesting to get around to, but again, not in any kind of rush. One that I do kind of regret is Away in the World by V.S. Naipaul. I purchased this because the premise of it sounds really interesting. And again, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on the premise because there's just no time. We have a lot of stuff to get through. If you're interested, the original book haul will be linked down below. I believe I read the back cover. V.S. Naipaul is a Nobel Prize laureate, and I have a copy of Half a Life on my shelf that I've had for a really long time. But this one sounded interesting. He is a Nobel laureate, so I thought, I'll grab it. And this is where, even though it was $1, I feel like I am probably not going to get around to this one anytime soon. There was really no reason for me to be taking up the space, and it's non-returnable because it was on sale. So I'm pretty much stuck with it, which is fine. Otherwise, I'm just going to end up donating it. I think maybe if I have not read it by this time next year, which is extremely likely, I probably will end up donating this book because I just don't know when I'm ever going to get around to it. And I don't hear people talk about it either. So if you have read Away in the World, please, I would welcome your feedback down below. Is this something that would be worth keeping in my library as a sort of library builder, and maybe I get around to it someday? It also just happens that VS Naipaul is in a part of the alphabet where I am always cramped for space. So that makes him a prime candidate for an unhaul. So let me know if you have read this book in the comment section down below. But as it stands, this is probably a huge candidate for an unhaul, and we'll see how that goes. The next one is not something I regret. It's Breath Eyes Memory, a novel by Edwidge Danticat. I have really wanted to read Edwidge Danticat for a very long time, and I still have not gotten around to it. So this one is also kind of a library builder. It's not a great edition of it, but again, it was in the sales section. So I got it for, this one was $2, but it's an author I really want to read, a book I really want to read that has been blessed by Oprah of all things. And I don't necessarily regret it. I feel like at this point, I'm wondering if I'm more likely to read Danticat on audio or listen on audio. So we'll see how that goes, but I don't regret having this book. I enjoy having it. I would like to get around to it at some point, so I feel okay having it on the shelf because I know I will get to it at some point. And then the final one from that grouping is The Stone Diaries by Carol Shields. Now, I did read this book about 20 years ago, maybe. I read it somewhere around the year 2001, and I remember really not liking it. I thought the writing was good, I just didn't like the book very much. And it is a Pulitzer Prize winner, so I feel like this is something that I'm going to revisit. Now that I'm a little bit older, I think I might be more receptive to what Carol Shields is doing with this book. I might have a deeper appreciation for it than I did in 2001 when I was 19. So we'll see how that goes. It's not a great edition. I feel like I probably should have gotten this from the library, maybe even listened to it on audio. So even though it was $1, I wonder about having this take up space in the library because, again, Carol Shields happens to be in a part of the alphabet where I'm always cramped for space. But I'm going to keep it, and I will reread it at some point, and we'll see how it goes. And actually, I lied to you. There is one more book that was part of the sale books at the local used bookstore, The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. I read The Age of Innocence 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago at this point, and loved it and have wanted to read more Edith Wharton ever since. And I haven't gotten around to it, but this is another library builder for me because I would absolutely love to get to The House of Mirth at some point. I've heard really good things about it. I think Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence is a fantastic book that more people should be talking about because it is great. And it's a Pulitzer Prize winner, not The House of Mirth, The Age of Innocence. And I am even thinking that I might reread it for my Pulitzer Prize project. But before I do that, I would want to read The House of Mirth because I've heard just great things about it. So this one will continue to be on my shelf until I get to it, whenever that may be. While I was in the used bookstore, what I was actually doing was looking for Pulitzer Prize winners that I have not read, and this one was not part of their sale books, but I found it on their shelves. It's A Summons to Memphis by Peter Taylor. This was the Pulitzer Prize winner for 1987, I believe. I think it was published in 1986 and won the Pulitzer in 87 because it won the year after Lonesome Dove, which I believe was published in 85 and won in 86. That's neither here nor there. It is a book that I am really interested in. It is part of my Pulitzer Prize project, so this one is fine to sit on my shelf until I get to it, and we will see when that will be. It's a family drama. I love family dramas, so we'll get to it. While I was there, I also found a copy of Ohio by Stephen Markley, which is a book that a lot of people have recommended to me, and I've heard a lot of really great things about. It's not a great copy of it, so I have two things about this. One, I probably should have either gotten this from the library or just waited until an audio was available because the audio is actually available now. I can't remember if the audio is on Libby or Scribd, but it is available now. So I probably should have just waited for that because now this kind of thick book is sitting on my shelf in prime real estate in the M's, and I don't know when I'm going to get around to it, so I feel like I should have just waited for either the library or an audio. I do still want to read it. I've heard a lot of really great things about it, but maybe I didn't need to purchase a copy for myself. And then there are 2 books that I purchased from my library because my library sells used books. The first one is Ironweed by William Kennedy, which is also part of my Pulitzer Prize project. Does not take up a lot of room, and I feel pretty comfortable having on my shelf and waiting until I get around to it. It's not taking up a lot of space. It is a movie tie-in, and I tend not to prefer movie tie-ins, but that's fine. And I'll get to it when I get to it, so it's just going to continue to sit, and we'll see what happens. Also from the library, I got a copy of Rabbit is Rich by John Updike. I'm not really excited to read John Updike, and this is another case where, because I'm not excited to read John Updike, why did I feel like I had to have him on my shelf? I could have just gotten this from the library, and I could have just listened to it on audio. So the thing with John Updike is he won 2 Pulitzer Prizes, both of them for books in the Rabbit series. This, I don't believe, is one of the Pulitzer Prize winners. I think this is the 2nd book in the series. I could very well be wrong about that. It's copyright 1981, so maybe this is one that he won a Pulitzer for, because I think he won in 82. I haven't done the research. I probably should have before starting this video, but so this may be one that he won a Pulitzer for. But because there are 4 books in the series total, I feel like I need to read the whole series to get the whole span of Rabbit's life, and that's probably a journey I could have taken on audio and not taken up a lot of space on my shelf. So even though it was at my library and used, I could have just spared myself the trouble and not done it. So this is what I mean when I say these help me be a little bit more intentional, because did I need this? No. Am I going to get around to it? Yes, because it is part of my Pulitzer Prize project, but it didn't have to be this way. And then the final book for my August 2019 book haul is Dominicana by Angie Cruz. This one I was really hyped up to read in 2019, and then I didn't get to it, and it's just kind of been sitting there and keeps slipping out of my mind now, so I don't know when I'll ever get to it now at this point. But it was something I was really excited about in 2019, so I understand why I got a copy. But now the likelihood that I'm going to get around to it is slipping and slipping and slipping. But I am still interested in it, so I'm going to give this a little bit more time and see if I get around to it. So of those 16 books that I hauled in 2019, I have only read 4. And of those 4, 2 of them were books that I had already read. So that's not great. It's not really great at all. But there are a lot of library builders in here. There are some mistakes, things that I probably shouldn't have hauled, maybe should have looked at my library or waited until they were available on a subscription service for audio. But, you know, it is what it is. So let's do a quick look. Of the 16, I think I probably didn't need to purchase all of Kitteridge, Away in the World, The Stone Diaries, Ohio, Rabbit is Rich. So 5 out of the 16 were things that I probably didn't need to purchase, but I'm learning, so that's something, right? Let's get into the August 2020 book haul. I've run out of space, so I have them piled up next to me. Hopefully they won't be falling over. The first 2 books that I hauled in August of 2020 are linked together because the second one was longlisted for the Booker Prize. I think it was even shortlisted. I don't remember. Everything is a blur right now. But I got Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Dangarembga. The reason I got it was because, again, This Mournable Body was longlisted for the Booker Prize. I believe it was ultimately shortlisted. So This Mournable Body is the 3rd book in a trilogy. And this is where I messed up. I was all excited to read This Mournable Body, so I found a used copy in the UK and ordered it. But I thought, well, it's the 3rd in a trilogy, so I have to read the other books. So I found a used copy of the 1st book in the trilogy, and here it is. And I didn't order the middle, and I don't know why. So I should have either just ordered the 3rd book, the one that was longlisted, and gone with that, or I should have ordered all 3, or I should have just waited and gotten them from the library, which is what I'm kind of thinking right now, because then now, a year later, the likelihood that I will get around to either one of them is getting slimmer and slimmer. So we'll see what happens with these. I don't even have a copy of the second one. I would still be curious to read Nervous Conditions, and if I like it, continue on to This Mournable Body, but I should have probably only gotten this one and then made a decision about whether or not to continue in the series, and instead I ordered 2 out of 3, which is a really curious decision that I made last year. So don't know what to do about that, except hold on to them a little bit longer and see what happens. The next one is a success story. It's The Yield by Tara June Winch. And I did read this year for Aussie April, and so far it is my favorite read of 2021. I love it. It's so good, and I'm so glad I got around to reading it. This was a buddy read that I did, and it is just spectacular. So yay for this book. Next is something that I got on a whim, which was probably a mistake, but I have this thing, I mentioned it earlier, if I'm in a bookstore and sometimes if somebody takes the time to get to know me and my taste and makes a recommendation based on that, I appreciate that. They've made a big effort. So I was in a bookstore in Missoula and somebody said, hey, you've read all of these other books. I think you would like Filthy Beasts by Kirkland Hamill. It's a memoir. And I looked at it, and it does tick a lot of the boxes that I like in a book. And realistically, this is probably something I would not have purchased, especially in hardcover. However, the fact that that bookseller had taken the time to think about what I have read in the past and make a recommendation, it was really nice. So I rewarded that with purchasing a copy. I don't know when I'll get around to it, but it does sound like a really interesting book, and it's certainly a lesser known book. So I would be happy to keep this on my shelf and get around to it at some point. Next, we have another success story, Luster by Raven Leilani. I ultimately read this as part of the BookTube Prize, and I liked parts of it, didn't really like other parts of it. I think it's uneven, but largely a good book and an interesting book. So that's kind of where I ended up on it. And I am glad that I got around to reading it. Next is The Death of Vivek Oji by Akweke Emeze. I have not gotten around to reading this one yet, but I am hoping to get around to it soon. I have actually thought about listening to this one on audio, even though I have this physical copy, and that is actually probably how I will ultimately get around to it. I'm hoping I will get around soon. If not, it's a prime candidate for my pile of possibilities for June of 2022. Either way, I will get around to it at some point. I feel pretty confident about that. And then the next one that I got was Shuggy Bane by Douglas Stewart. And at this point, I believe it was only longlisted for the Booker Prize. I don't remember if the short list had come out at this point. I don't think it had. And ultimately, it went on to win the Booker Prize, but that didn't happen until October or November. I think November. All I knew at this point in 2020 was that I really wanted to read it. It's an LGBTQ story. It's about a complicated family. It's about addiction and trauma and things like that. It's not a happy book, but it is a very good book. I loved it. I know there are a lot of people who don't appreciate this book because it is a difficult read. It is sort of full of pain and torment and things like that, but I really appreciated it. It resonated very deeply with me, and I am glad that it won the Booker Prize last year. Next was something that was a bit of a mistake, not purchasing it, but that I included it in my book haul. It's Labyrinth of Ice, The Triumphant and Tragic Greeley Polar Expedition. My husband was interested in reading this, and we ended up purchasing a copy because the physical book is really beautiful and well put together. It has these really great photos in it and all that stuff. So we purchased a copy, but we didn't really purchase it for me. It was purchased for him, and I included it in my book haul, and I don't really know why, because I didn't actually think I was going to get around to read it. I mean, there was a possibility, but, I don't know that this is something I'm going to get around to, certainly not anytime soon. So I think what I'm going to do is leave myself a note and kind of officially take this one out of my book hauls, because my husband is the one who really wanted this, and he is the one who read this, not me. So I'm going to remove it and just let it be as it is. Like, it's fine that it was in my book hauls, but I don't want to be held accountable for it going forward because it was not purchased for me and it was not purchased so I could read it. But here it is among all of the others. So I'm going to try to remedy that going forward. And then the final book in my book haul is something that I had already read. It's Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I actually had access to this one on NetGalley, and I loved it so much that I ended up purchasing a copy for myself, because when I really enjoy something, if I got it for free, I feel like I need to support the author and support the book. Maggie O'Farrell didn't really need my support at this time last year, but I just loved the book and I wanted to have a copy, and I knew that it was going to be in my best books of 2020. I knew that it was something that was going to keep coming up throughout the year, so I wanted to have a copy that I could hold up as well. There is that element of it, being perfectly honest. So I had already read it, and I just wanted to make sure I had a copy. And this is something that I would reread, so I don't really regret that either. So of the 2020 book haul, there were 9 books total. I read 4. One of them I had previously read, and that was obviously Hamnet, which we just talked about. So the overall results for these 2 book hauls are not good. Of the 25 books that were in these 2 book hauls, I've only read 8 books. And again, some of those were things I had already read when I brought them into my library. So it's not that I've actually read 8 books brand new since I brought these books into my library. But it is what it is. I'm doing a learning process, and I am learning every day in every book haul revisit that I do. So if you have thoughts about any of these, the V.S. Naipaul in particular, but any of the ones that I haven't read, things you think I should prioritize, things you think I can just let go, let me know in the comment section down below. I would appreciate your feedback. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.